Hey guys, I'm Heidi Priebe. Welcome to my channel if you're new. Today I am making a video that is for INFPs and ENFPs because I think that these types really struggle with this particular thing, but it's really for anyone who has trouble with this. And I think that most people who have introverted feeling somewhere in their cognitive stacking are to some extent going to struggle with this particular issue. This doesn't mean you have to have introverted feeling in your stack. This can also be an attachment thing, but I wanted to talk about the issue of letting people go. So what I mean when I say letting people go is letting people walk out of your life and go their own way when it is time for that to happen, when it feels like you've gone as far as you can go together and you know in some part of yourself that it's now time to move on and follow a path in your own life that doesn't include that person. Or maybe that doesn't include that person in the same capacity that you have included them in the past. And I think that this can be particularly difficult for those of us who value introverted feeling, because when you have introverted feeling, you're kind of having two different relationships with people at all times. You're one, having the relationship with them in real time, where you are genuinely interacting with them, exchanging thoughts and ideas and feelings, and responding to them in the moment and spending time with them. But there's also the relationship that you have with that person inside of your head. So all of us, regardless of personality type, have constructs of other people that live inside of our minds, right? Like if I imagine myself talking to one of my friends right now, that is not the actual relationship that I have with my friend, right? I'm not actually having that conversation, and the things that I'm gonna picture my friend telling me in my brain might not be what they would actually tell me in real life if I were to go have the same conversation. But a part of me who has internalized and learned a lot of my friends' behaviors is able to carry on kind of an imaginary version or a representation of that friendship inside of my head, even when my friend is not present. Again, everyone does this. But what introverted feelers in particular can really struggle with is ending their relationship with the representation of that person inside of their minds, even if they feel completely ready to let the actual human being go. So I'm going to explain a little bit more about what I mean by this. So a couple of weeks ago, I was listening to a Sarah Silverman podcast. I think that Sarah Silverman is probably an ENTP. I relate to so much of the way that she thinks and processes, but I really noticed that difference in the decision-making axis. So someone called into her and asked her on the podcast, because she answers a lot of fan questions, how do you let people go? So there's someone in my life, I think that for this person it was a romantic partner, who I know we are not good for each other, we are not helping each other grow or develop, but I don't know how to let the relationship go. Do you have any advice? And it was interesting because it sounded like she was really struggling with even understanding the question, because ENTPs don't have FI, right? So those internal representations of people inside of their minds are not weighted as heavily when they look at their relationship with someone as the real relationship that they're having with someone in real time, because that's what you use extroverted feeling for, right? So her answer, it was logical. It wasn't that it was a bad answer, but I think that it probably didn't answer the question in the way that the man was asking it, because she was saying, well, it sounds like you're not getting anything out of this relationship. It sounds like it's not serving you or the other person. So what's the problem with simply going your separate ways and allowing it to maybe be a friendship instead of a relationship, or maybe be someone you catch up with a couple times a year as opposed to someone you live with and share your life with? And it was interesting to me how kind of simply she seemed to see the situation. And that's not to say, like, I don't know Sarah Silverman. I don't know if that would be something that she would struggle with or not in real life, but it seemed like she could take this very logical analysis of it and go, oh, well, you're no longer getting along in real life, so it doesn't make sense for you to continue to try to get along and to try to make this work. So why not just do the thing that does work? And what was interesting about that is that this is very sound advice for people who use extroverted feeling and who do focus really heavily on the real relationships that they have with people, right? But those of us with introverted feeling tend to over-rely on the imaginary representations of people that we have inside of our minds. And when, let's say, a relationship ends, it's often that representation that is harder to let go of than the actual person. And this might sound absolutely bizarre to anyone who does not value introverted feeling or who does not have some other disposition that leads them to also value their kind of representations of people above their actual relationships with them. That can be a trauma thing, right? It can be a lot of things. But it all leads to the same end product, which is having difficulty with letting people go because you are more attached to your idea of them than you are to the actual person. So when things with the actual person stop working out, it can actually take you a really long time to recognize that, and B, a really long time to accept that you might have to let that person go because you're afraid of what that means about what's going to happen to the version of them that you have in your mind, which may actually be where you're getting the majority of your comfort from. So if this is the situation you're in, so let's say there's someone in your life that you know you ought to let go of or that you want to let go of, and you can see that your relationship is no longer healthy or functional or whatever it is, but you're really struggling with the letting go process. The first thing I would recommend you do is sit down and really sort out and get clear with yourself about what of your relationship is real. So how often do you actually talk to them, spend time with them, share a routine with them, right? What is all of the real stuff that you guys actually engage on in real life? So this is stuff that would be observable to a third party who is in the room with both of you, right? Versus how much of the relationship with that person happens inside of your own mind. And you're gonna have to be really mindful when you think about this. How many times a day do you have thoughts like, oh, I'm gonna call that person later, and that's gonna feel nice. I'm going to draw on memories that I have with that person, and that's gonna feel nice. I am anticipating what that person would say about X, Y, or Z, and later when I see them, I'm gonna see if that matches up with reality. All of those thoughts that might seem so fleeting are actually representations of a person that permeate our lives. So when we let someone go, we're not just letting the actual person go, we're also letting go of all of the comforting thoughts that we might have over the course of a day around that person and around our anticipation of the future with them. So that future can be short term, I'm gonna talk to them later today, or it could be long term, I'm gonna spend my life with them, right? And a lot of what we're letting go of when we let go of people is we are letting go of the future that we had planned inside of our minds with them. And that can actually be a lot more painful than letting go of what's really happening in reality. Because what's really happening in reality might be that you guys are no longer aligned. It might be that you no longer enjoy each other's company as much as you used to, or you no longer really want to share your life together. But maybe you have this image of a future with them where the problems that you have right now are magically gone and you are happy and harmonious and everything is functioning perfectly like it was in the beginning. And maybe that's actually going to be the hardest thing for you to give up on, is that future that you had imagined, okay? And there is very real grief associated with giving up a plan for the future that you had, small or large scale. But it's important to note that that's not the same thing as letting the actual person go, okay? So there's two things you're gonna be mourning, and you have to first separate them out. What is the real, actual interactions that I have with this person that I'm going to miss? And what is my internal representation of this person, which I'm going to miss? Because if someone's out of your life for good, it's really hard to keep that fantasy alive of things magically getting better and you staying together in the future and having a happy life together, right? There are certain fantasies we have that require a little bit of reality in there in order for them to feel real enough for us to be comforted by them. But make no mistake, fantasies about the future can be extremely comforting. They can be this balm that we just rub all over our psyche anytime something gets rough. And unfortunately, that is not the healthiest way to deal with things getting rough, right? I have another video on this where I talk about healthy versus unhealthy fantasies. So figuring out whether you are making a plan that you're going to work towards, which is kind of a healthy fantasy, or whether you are dissociating from the reality of what's happening and going off into a fantasy land that you don't really have any reality built beneath. So it would actually be pretty hard for you to arrive there in real life. But being aware of those dissociative fantasies and how often and in what capacity you're having them can be a really important step in your healing process. Because fantasies like food, like alcohol, like substances, like television, can be used to numb ourselves out from what's actually going on. And if we have a relationship in real life that in real time and space is just not working out between two people, it is not kind or loving for either of you to hold that relationship hostage so that you can keep soothing yourself with this fantasy, right? It's okay to just acknowledge that you have a very big fantasy and that it gives you comfort, and that if you are to let this person go, you now have an awareness of where you're going to need comfort, how frequently, and to what extent. And now you can start looking at alternative options to giving yourself not what that person gave you, but what that fantasy about that person gave you. Okay? And both of those areas are probably going to be places where you're going to have to find compensatory strategies. So let's say you are used to calling someone at the end of every day and debriefing your day. You might truly in real time really miss that if you let that person go, right? So that's a real thing that you're gonna miss. But you might also really miss when you walk to work every day and listen to music and start thinking about this alternate future that you have with this person. You might also miss the comfort that you're going to get out of that. Or maybe for now you want to let go of that fantasy, but as soon as things get rough, 2 or 3 or 4 months from now, if you aren't aware that that's a fantasy and you start dissociating back into it, you might think, oh, this means I want that person back, right? But maybe you haven't talked to that person in 3 or 4 months. Maybe you have no idea what's going on with them or if things would be better with you this time around. You aren't recognizing the fantasy for what it is, which is a bomb that you're putting over your reality in order to not feel some other type of pain. And so figuring out what the function of this fantasy life that involves this real person is going to help you understand where you need to let go of someone in reality, which is actually often the easier thing to do, because in reality, by the time you want to let someone go, it's usually because things aren't working so well, right? So the philosophy that kind of underlies all of this is just taking that radical responsibility for whatever it is that you're really struggling with in your life and ceasing to project it onto someone else. Because if you believe that one person is solving all of your problems and keeping you comforted and stable and secure, when really it's a combination of that person's true influence on your life and your fantasy about that person and the representation of them that you hold in your mind to kind of keep you safe and warm internally when they're not available, you're not dealing with things accurately and you're actually projecting more onto that person than what is true or fair. And that's going to make navigating the end of a relationship with them very difficult. Not only between you, but internally. So what you need to do is figure out what type of comfort you're getting from that fantasy about them, what type of comfort that idea of them that keeps you company when they are not physically present is giving you that you could give yourself, because the good news is that that representation of them is not real them. It exists entirely inside of your own mind. So if you have someone who loves you and thinks well of you and respects you, even when they are not standing in front of you telling you how they feel about you, you're probably able to recall a felt sense of what it's like in your body and in your emotions when they do express positive feelings for you. And that felt sense, that permission that you are giving yourself in those moments to feel valued, loved, like you are worthy of praise and admiration and connection, that's actually an emotion that you are giving yourself in that moment, right? You're just giving yourself permission to feel it via the memory of that person. You don't want to own your own positive feelings of yourself in certain moments, so you recall the memory or the idea that you have of this person to give you those positive feelings, but you don't need to do that. Those feelings are in you the whole time. And of course, it is always going to be hard to let go of the real person. But often by the time we get to a point where we think that we have to or want to let go of that real person, it's because the actual relationship has become dysfunctional or no longer aligns with what we need and want in life. And so that might actually be the easier part of the equation. The harder part is going to be reclaiming the things that we think that we can only get through association with that person, which ironically we already have inside of ourselves, because merely recollecting that person allows us to give ourselves permission to feel those things. That's why in some cases you can withstand a lot of dysfunction, because you are still being kind of kept warm by this fantasy of how you want this person to think of you that is very different. And so the process becomes about perpetually allowing yourself to feel the way that you believe only they could make you feel. Because if you have ever felt any of those things in the absence of them, it means that it's not coming from them. It's coming from you. And you finally giving yourself permission to feel the things that you suspect might be true about yourself that are pretty positive. And often that is the real work of letting someone go. Taking back all of the things that we've projected onto them and owning them as things that are inside of us, for better and for worse, right? It means we can't blame them for the things that go wrong in our life anymore. It also means we can't blame them for the things that go right. And depending on where you're coming from, one side of that coin might feel scarier to you than the other one. But if there is any advice I can give to all of us out there who use introverted feeling, or who just have these very vivid representations of people inside of our minds that we are holding quasi-real relationships with inside of our own minds, it's just recognizing Just being willing to name that for what it is, which is the fantasy element of a relationship, allows you to start working with it in reality. As soon as we name a fantasy, now we've brought it into the realm of the real, right? Because we're dealing with what it actually is. And the realm of the real is always where we're going to be able to grow and learn from. And that place of growth and integration and learning is going to be a lot easier to heal from than the opposite. I forget where I heard this from, and I cannot find it online again, but I remember seeing this quote one time that was like, real problems always have solutions, unreal problems never do. So when we are struggling so much with something, like how to let someone go, consider whether or not you have yet brought the entire problem into the realm of the real, because that's the only place you can actually make change from. And I think that a lot of the time, the things that we are trying so hard to figure out how to let go of in the real world are already gone, right? The relationship we wanted to have with someone that was healthy and fulfilling and growing, by the time you're ready to let that person go, is probably already long gone in the real world. So all it is a process of accepting, being willing to work with reality, and finding a true solution to the true problem of needing something to replace that comfort that you got out of fantasizing, right? Maybe friendship can replace that. Maybe adventure can replace that. Maybe having something different to look forward to inside of your own mind can serve as a pretty solid replacement for that other future that you had planned. It's not just our real lives that need reorganizing when things go wrong. It's also the lives that we live inside of our minds, especially if you are an NF type who lives a lot of your life inside your own mind. All right, I think that's all I have to say on this topic for today. If you are an ENFP or an INFP personality type, I want to remind you that I do run 6-week ENFP and INFP Soul Bootcamp courses on my website, www.heidipriebe.com. I will put the link in the description of this video. And in those bootcamps, we actually talk quite a bit about recognizing the fantasy from the real and understanding when you are missing out on the real life that you have in front of you in real time because you are preferring and latching onto that fantasy life that's in your head. So if that's something that you resonate with and that you struggle with, I really recommend you check that program out. In the meantime, let me know your thoughts in the comments of this video. I'm always really curious about what you guys are thinking and feeling and experiencing. And until next time, I love you. I hope you're taking care of yourselves, and I will see you back here again really soon.